evening from New York. This is Monday, October 25th, 8 days until the 2010 midterm elections. And in our fifth story, the right-wing's secret money machine prepares a surge in its already outsized campaign spending, while the godfather of their effort, Karl Rove, defends secret donations now that it has become clear that his group was not raising enough money through disclosed donations. Meantime, corporations that benefited from TARP are openly giving to GOP candidates who try to smear their Democratic opponents for having supported TARP and its successful program. House Minority Leader John Boehner, the top recipient of money from companies that have received TARP bailout money, according to the Washington Post, $200,000 to Mr. Boehner from those corporations' political action committees. The House Republican Whip Eric Cantor, the number 2 recipient of such campaign contributions, $187,000. The third and fourth top recipients ranking Republicans on the Finance and Tax Writing Committees. And while TARP companies like J.P. Morgan Chase and Citigroup and General Motors also gave PAC money to Democrats, it is, of course, the Republicans who are trying to have it both ways, and not just the GOP leaders. For instance, in the Indiana Senate race, the Democratic nominee Brad Ellsworth has been attacked in a political ad for supporting, quote, the Obama-Reid-Pelosi agenda, including the disastrous bank bailout. But the Republican nominee responsible for that ad, Dan Coates, received more than $30,000 from companies that took the disastrous TARP money, according to the Washington Post. And that is a snapshot of the disclosed side of this year's political gravy train. The super PAC's secret money is far broader of a side, with the largest outside conservative groups planning a coordinated final week attack. That according to the New York Times. We carpet bombed for 2 months in 82 races. Now it's sniper time, said Rob Collins, president of American Action Network, using imagery unfortunately fitting to his side of the cause. That group shares office space a few blocks from the White House with Rove's American Crossroads and American Crossroads GPS. A reminder that super PACs are prohibited by law from coordinating their political activity with candidates or parties, but the super PACs certainly coordinate with each other. Weekly strategy sessions include about 25 representatives from pro-Republican groups, and the Times obtained one of their color-coded master spreadsheets, which helps them decide where to spend their money. One example, Central Florida, where the Democratic incumbent, Congresswoman Suzanne Cosmas, once held a 4-to-1 fundraising advantage over the Republican challenger Sandy Adams. In fact, Adams did not run her first ad until today, but she hardly needed to. Attack ads against Congresswoman Cosmas from those outside groups have more than made up the difference, including $770,000 in spending from the 60+ Foundation and $250,000 more from the Chamber of Commerce, according to the Congresswoman. And the degree to which money from these outside groups favors Republicans becomes more clear with each day. Pro-Republican groups that do not disclose have clobbered their pro-Democratic counterparts, $121 million to $50 million, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. Among all outside groups, including those that disclose, pro-GOP groups win out as well, $166 million to $71 million. And you might just recall that Karl Rove was against non-disclosed money back in 2004. Bob Schieffer of CBS wondered why he was now for it.
I'm against all the 527 ads and activities. I don't think they're fair. I don't think it's appropriate. They're misusing the law. They all ought to stop.
So why is it, if they were that bad back then, they're so wholesome now?
Well, I'm not suggesting it is what it is. And the choice is whether you fight the battle with one arm tied behind your back or not. As I say, I wish we had a different system, but we got the system we got.
Other key players from Rove's American Crossroads claimed to be for disclosure as recently as this past May. In a panel discussion, as reported by Politico, American Crossroads board member Mike Duncan said, quote, I'm a proponent of lots of money in politics and full disclosure in politics. But less than 1 month after that panel discussion, with American Crossroads struggling to raise enough money, American Crossroads GPS was born. 3 groups that don't disclose their funding have aired nearly 47,000 ads over 11 weeks, according to Media Matters. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and American Crossroads GPS, the top 2. Let's turn first to Washington Post staff writer, Newsweek columnist, MSNBC contributor Ezra Klein. Ezra, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
This extraordinary amount of secret money, we've tried to put it in some kind of perspective for weeks now. At this point, 8 days out, how would you characterize it?
It's an extraordinary amount of secret money. You know, I'm struck by Karl Rove there because, as I remember, he was part of, I think it's called a presidential administration that happened to also control the House and the Senate for a period, and they did nothing serious on campaign finance reform. And so now they're playing this game. Then in a couple years, it'll be the Democrats. And the system legitimately keeps getting more broken. And this is what I can't figure out when I try to characterize it. Why do they, the politicians, want to keep playing this game? It favors them one year. It goes against them the other year. They spend all their time on the phone. The people in this country think they're completely discredited and corrupt. Why don't they change it? What is in this for them over the long run? That's what I can't figure out about all of it.
Does the answer to that lie in the simple fact that incumbency is incumbency, and staying in office becomes at some point, for the lesser-minded of the politicians of both parties,
I believe that's right. The only convincing answer I've ever heard is that as much as you hate as an incumbent spending every day dialing for dollars and calling these fundraisers and sitting down with lobbyists, at least you know you've got that network and your challenger probably doesn't. But at the same time, these 527s, when you say those numbers, one thing I think people need to put into perspective are these companies, a lot of that money could go the normal route. It could just go through disclosure. It could just go to individual candidates. And they don't want to do it. It's a strategy. They've made it a decision, and this is now going to come and bite all of these guys the next round. The money goes back and forth depending on who looks like they're going to win, and everybody who's benefiting from massive anonymous donations now is going to be on the wrong side of them the next time. It will always come back to haunt them.
The idea that these groups cannot interact with actual campaigns, there's no doubt what a strategic force the groups are collectively, despite the requirement that they can't coordinate their efforts directly with candidates, right? It just allows them to coordinate in a different direction.
Right, and at this point we have such sophisticated data modeling tools, such incredible information about voters, that these things are much more like national campaigns than they are like small groups. The idea that these are not coordinated with campaigns, I mean, that's true, but it's a wall that is completely meaningless. There is nothing about these that are different than campaigns, and frankly, these are probably much, much, much more sophisticated than the campaigns themselves.
The big draw, Ezra, for all the secret giving, obviously, it would be the secrecy as opposed to some sort of altruism or even political concern, and the end result, in most cases, at least this time around, has been attack ads against Democrats. Does anything in recent election cycles compare to the dynamic we're experiencing right now?
It feels like in every election cycle we're looking at things we saw before but worse. So now we have Citizens United and non-disclosure is easier. But we did have 527s before. One thing that I keep trying to point out about Citizens United, nobody would have said to you 4 years ago, 8 years ago that our campaign finance system was working. It was broken then. It is more broken now. It gets more broken by the year. So yeah, it's different, but it's different in the way it's always different. It keeps getting worse, and it will get worse until these guys get pressured into changing it, or they decide because they're tired of the people looking at them askance and they're tired of going through this year after year to change it on their own.
In the Democratic, or at least the liberal pushback here, organizations like labor unions trying to counter the spending, but the money continues to pour in for the other side. And is it true that unions are essentially reaching their upper limits right now?
Very much. And remember, unions keep shrinking. They are not what they once were. There is simply, if Democrats don't want to turn and become a much more pro-business party, there is nothing on the other side that has this sort of money. When you see the hedge funders sitting with the energy companies, sitting with the Chamber of Commerce, that's where the money is in this country. It ain't on the union side.
Ezra Klein of the Washington Post. Great thanks as always, Ezra.
Thank you.